Hey, welcome back to Product Chronicles, the channel where we take software products that crashed and burned and try to figure out whether they were doomed from day one or just misunderstood by their own makers. Today's episode is a bit of a deep cut. We are talking about Adobe Flash Catalyst. Yeah, I know, most of you either never heard of it or vaguely remember seeing it buried in Creative Suite next to Adobe Bridge and quietly pretending it wasn't there. But trust me, this one worth digging up. Flash Catalyst was supposed to bridge the sacred gap between designers and developers. It had the vision, the integration, the marketing, and still it flopped spectacularly. Why? That's what we are here to unpack. This one's for anyone who has ever sat in a product meeting and thought, surely this can't go wrong. Designers, PMs, devs, you'll all find something familiar here. We'll go deep into the product strategy, the user assumptions, the internal politics, and the moment Adobe realized they were building a shiny UI tool for a platform syncing faster than MySpace. By the end of this video, you'll walk away with a better understanding of what not to do when building cross-functional tools, how tech shifts can undermine even good ideas, and how easy it is to confuse a clever solution with a viable product. Let's get into it. It's the late 2000s. Adobe has just acquired Macromedia, Flash is the reigning king of web interactivity, and the design world is buzzing about rich internet applications. In creative studios, designers scrubbed gorgeous UIs in Photoshop and Illustrator, then throw them over the wall to developers who furiously translate them into code. Miscommunication abounds. The designer-developer gap is about as wide as the Grand Canyon. Adobe, ever the visionary, decides to build a magic bridge across that chasm. Enter Adobe Flash Catalyst, codename Thermo. During the development, a product ambitiously pitched to let designers build interactive Flash interfaces without writing a single line of code. It promised to empower designers and free developers, uniting both sides in harmony. What could possibly go wrong? Flash Catalyst's debut was hyped like a Hollywood premiere. Sneak peeks at Adobe Max 2007 drew O's and R's. After all, here was a tool that could turn static artwork into working apps as if by alchemy. The project was led by none other than Mark Anders, a software legend who had co-created Microsoft ASP.NET, now turned Adobe Fellow. The stage was set for Flash Catalyst to revolutionize workflows. Adobe's marketing spun a grand tale. Designers would create interactive user interfaces without writing code and continue to refine the design throughout development, while developers would smoothly add the backend logic. It was pitched as the best of both worlds, a visual tool that would finally let developers and designers live together in peace, each doing what they do best. So with great fanfare, Flash Catalyst launched as part of Creative Suite 5 in 2010. This was to be the catalyst for a new era of collaboration. Designers could now supposedly build a functional app, mock-up by themselves, hand it to developers, and watch the final products come to life without the usual "that's not what I designed" drama. Adobe's senior product managers like Tim Buntle were confidently touting that Flash Catalyst is designed for the professional interaction designer who does wireframes and layouts and hands them off to a developer. The vision: turn what used to be a coding slog into a fluid creative process. It was a story straight out of a product manager's dream, until reality and a shifting tech landscape wrote a very different ending.
I was expecting hot box orgy, and what I got was stress box diarrhea.
To understand Flash Catalyst's grand vision, let's step into Adobe's mindset circa 2008-2010. The problem they saw was this: designers would design an interface in Illustrator or Photoshop, then developers would have to recreate that vision in code. In the process, pixel-perfect designs could turn into off-kilter implementations. Interactions the designer imagined might get lost in translation. Adobe Flash Catalyst set out to eliminate this disconnect. As Adobe's platform product manager Stephen Hines described, the traditional workflow was broken. Designers create a set of images and then a developer has to translate those materials into a real website. Catalyst solution: let designers build the real thing themselves so nothing gets lost in translation. Using Catalyst, a designer could input artwork directly from Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator and convert it into an interactive interface. Buttons, sliders, scroll bars, all those could start as layered graphics, and through Catalyst magically turns it into functional UI components. Adobe's speech was that this improved workflow allows designers to maintain control of the user experience while developers stay focused on code application logic. The workflow went something like this. A designer draws up a gorgeous interface in Illustrator or Photoshop with every button and widget on its own layer. Instead of slicing it up and writing specs for a developer, they would input those graphics into Flash Catalyst. Thanks to a new Adobe graphics format called FXG, Flash XML Graphics, Catalyst could ingest PSD or AI files with layers intact. Once in Catalyst, the designer would switch to interaction design mode, converting static elements into interactive ones. Need a button? Just right-click that layer or a fancy gradient button design and convert it into a button component. Want a dynamic image gallery? Turn those image placeholders into a scrollable list. Catalyst came with a palette of pre-made UI components, and you could also define states or pages of the application, essentially different screens or views, all visually without code. Using simple timeline and interaction panels, the designer could specify that on click of button X go to state 2 with a fancy fade transition, or through a few clicks and drop-down menus. Even animations and transitions were largely one-click affairs. In minutes, a static design would become a working prototype with Catalyst handling the behind-the-scenes code. The endgame was that once a designer had a working UI in Catalyst, they could hand it off as a FXP file, Flash Catalyst project file, essentially a zipped Flex project, to a developer. The developer would open it in Adobe Flash Builder and find all the layout, states and placeholder interactions already there. Then the developer could focus on the hard stuff, hooking up real data, integrating with backend services, writing application logic, and so on, without having to rewrite the UI from scratch. In theory, this meant faster development cycles and fewer misunderstandings. Designers got to see a working prototype of their vision earlier, and stakeholders could give feedback on a functional UI rather than static mockups. Adobe even claimed this could secure feedback sooner in the development process and reduce iterative churn. Adobe's team truly believed they had struck gold with this workflow. The designer can do all of their work and then hand off a Flex project. Also, the designer can define a finished product without the developer at all, said Adobe's team bundle in an optimistic flourish. By 2010, Flash Catalyst had graduated from Adobe Labs into a real 1.0 product bundled in Creative Suite 5, sitting alongside Photoshop, Illustrator, Flash Professional, and so on. The question was, would this vision hold up when it met the real world?
Banshee's got a location on shore. You ready for this? Let's find out.
It wasn't lack of talent or effort behind Flash Catalyst development, the team was stacked with capable folks. We have mentioned Mark Anders, who brought serious engineering creds. He joined Adobe specifically to work on the Flash platform, and Flash Catalyst was his brainchild to empower designers. The engineering team included many from the former Macromedia Flags group, experts in rich UI frameworks, and they worked to ensure Catalyst output meshed perfectly with the evolving Flags for SDK. Adobe even had Ethan Eisman, a top user experience designer, involved in crafting Catalyst's own interface, ironically designing the design tool. On the product management side, Tim Buntle was a senior PM advocating Catalyst, and folks like Stephen Hines were out evangelizing the vision to the press. In the Adobe reorg chat, Catalyst fell under the Platform Business Unit, the division that handled Flash Player, Flex, AI, and so on, headed by VP David Mantvani. This is notable. It means Flash Catalyst was driven by the Flash side of Adobe's house, not the traditional Creative Suite teams like Photoshop or Illustrator. In a way, Catalyst was a collaboration between those worlds. It needed buy-in from the Creative Suite side, but was spearheaded by the engineering-heavy Flash platform team. This cross-cutting nature may have sown some seeds of tension. One can imagine the Photoshop team looking sideways at this newcomer in the suit. what is Flex folks building a UI tool with an Eclipse underbelly? In fact, it's interesting that Flash Catalyst itself was built on Eclipse. Unlike Adobe's other design apps that use a custom UI framework and C++ code, Catalyst was essentially a Flex application running on Adobe AI, wrapped in Eclipse. The result, its user interface tried to mimic Adobe's style, but some designers found it a bit alien and sluggish compared to, say, Photoshop. So in terms of internal dynamics, Catalyst was a bit of an odd duck, a design tool made by the developer tool team. Adobe's hope was to unite these groups, but it also meant Catalyst didn't have a long-standing champion in the pantheon of established design apps. It was new version 1.0 and had to prove itself quickly. Meanwhile, outside Adobe's walls, the clock was ticking in ways that Catalyst creators could not fully control. The very foundation that Flash Catalyst stood on, namely Adobe Flash technology, was starting to shake. In 2007, when Thermo was first conceived, Flash was ubiquitous on desktops and the iPhone hadn't yet taught Adobe a painful lesson. By 2010, when Catalyst hit the market, Steve Jobs had famously written his thoughts on Flash letter. The iPhone and iPod refused to support Flash, and the industry was buzzing about HTML5 as the future of cross-platform rich content. In other words, Adobe's strategic high ground was turning into quicksand, especially in the mobile arena. Flash Catalyst was built entirely around the Flash platform. It output SWF files and Flex code meant to run in Flash Player or AI. It had zero support for HTML, CSS or any non-Flash technology. As such, Catalyst was tied to the fate of Flash itself, and that fate was looking shakier with each passing month of 2010-2011. In essence, Adobe was racing to get designers on board the Flash train, just as the train was starting to derail. Dark humor indeed. Flash Catalyst's demise wasn't just due to external forces. There were plenty of product-specific issues and miscalculations that sealed its fate. In hindsight, the whole endeavor makes for a darkly comic case study in product management missteps. Let's unpack the key reasons Flash Catalyst failed to ignite. First, solve the wrong problem, or solve it too late. Flash Catalyst addressed the designer-developer workflow for Flash apps. By 2010, the most pressing problem for Adobe's audience wasn't how do I make Flash development more efficient, but rather should I be using Flash at all. The world was pivoting to mobile and open web standards, where Flash's relevance was diminishing. Adobe was essentially perfecting a workflow for a platform that was already in decline. It's like meticulously redesigning the cockpit of a plane that's running out of fuel. No matter how smooth you make that designer dev handoff, if fewer clients want Flash-based projects, you are catering to a shrinking market. The timing could not have been worse. Flash Catalyst arrived just as the Flash vs HTML5 showdown heated up, and unfortunately for Catalyst, HTML5 won that war. Then lack of real adoption. Designers weren't swayed. For all the talk of empowering designers, many designers simply didn't embrace Flash Catalyst. Adobe assumed that a large chunk of their design customer base was just dying to add interactivity to their skill set if only coding weren't a barrier. In reality, many designers were quite comfortable using simpler tools like making clickable PDFs or static mockups and leaving the heavy interactive to developers. Those who truly wanted to create interactivity content often already used Adobe Flash Professional or tools like Dreamweaver for simply web prototyping. Flash Catalyst tried to carve out a new niche that designers hadn't asked for loudly enough. It turns out learning Flash Catalyst itself was non-trivial. You had to grasp concepts of states, transitions, and component logic, which, while easier than coding, still required a design mind to think like a programmer in some ways. The irony, Catalyst was supposed to save time, but for many it added another tool to learn and another format to deal with. Then insufficient power for complex work or the kiddie pool effect. Flash Catalyst was great for simple interactivity. hover effects, basic page navigation, slideshows, but the moment you needed something beyond its templates, you hit a wall. It deliberately had no coding interface to keep things designer-friendly, which meant if the built-in interactions couldn't achieve what you wanted, tough luck, you had to export to Flash Builder and involve a developer. In other words, Catalyst could make a prototype but not a complete app beyond a certain complexity, and some designers found its prototyping power limited compared to just using the full-Flash professional app. Next, overlapping and confusing product story. Adobe added Flash Catalyst to an already crowded lineup of tools. If you were a designer in 2010 looking to prototype and interactive design, what should you use? Photoshop for static mockups, Fireworks, another Adobe tool, Macromedia, which was actually pretty good at making click-through web prototypes and had interactive symbols, Flash Professional if you knew a bit of scripting, or Flash Catalyst. Adobe's answer would be use Catalyst for Flash apps and a new tool called Adobe Proto for HTML5 prototypes. It got messy. Many designers either never understood where Catalyst fit or thought maybe I'll wait until this matures. In a twist of irony, Adobe later introduced Adobe XD, Experience Design, in 2016, a tool for designing and prototyping user interfaces. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? XD doesn't output production code, but it lets designers craft interactive prototypes easily for web and mobile, essentially fulfilling a lot of the same promises of Catalyst but focused on modern platforms. Adobe even recommended that former Catalyst users migrate to Adobe XD for similar needs.
Look at yourselves. You know, you pass yourself off as cynical people, but you still have some faith in the system, don't you?
The story of Adobe Flash Catalyst is equal parts ambitious and cautionary. It's the tale of a product that tried to do everything right in theory, address a genuine pain points, leverage a company's strengths, innovate in workflow, but ultimately failed due to a mix of external disruption and internal miscalculations. From a product management perspective, the dark humor writes itself. Adobe solved a problem no one would have a few years later. They built the bridge to nowhere, an elegant designer-developer workflow for a platform that was fated to implode. It's a reminder that timing and market context can trump even the best laid product plans. As PMs, we have to ask, are we building for the future or for a future that won't exist? The target users, designers, weren't exactly pleading for a tool like this, or at least not in the form Catalyst provided. Sure, designers wanted easier handoffs, but many didn't want to become quasi-developers overnight. Catalyst may have misjudged user appetites. It gave designers more autonomy, but many designers didn't necessarily want that kind of autonomy. A lesson here: know your user. Sometimes the solution you think they should want isn't the one they will adopt. Internally, Flash Catalyst suffered from being a bit of a political football between orgs and lacking long-term executive backing once strategies shifted. When you are a new product that cuts across established domains, you need strong sponsorship and perhaps a bit of a luck to survive the inevitable turbulence. Catalyst had initial support, but once that waned, it had no shelter. The moment Flash's future was questioned, Catalyst became an expendable experiment. Technologically, Flash Catalyst was actually pretty clever, which is another bittersweet point. Sometimes you can have great technology and still fail because the ecosystem isn't there. So that was Adobe Flash Catalyst, the tool that promised to unite designers and developers, and instead got quietly buried by its own parent company like a beta feature no one wanted to support. If you found this breakdown useful, hit the like button to tell the algorithm this kind of nerdy product failure content is actually worth watching. Subscribe to Product Chronicles for more deep dives into software you forgot existed, and leave a comment if there is another product disaster you want me to dissect next. I got a long list, but I love good suggestions. Thanks for watching, and remember, every great roadmap starts with an idea that didn't work last time.